This is the Get Geekish podcast.
Ever felt a spark of excitement when talking about your favorite things? That's the feeling we celebrate on Get Geekish. Here, there's no gatekeeping, just a community celebrating the unique things that make us, well, us. Now, here's your hosts, Derek and Beano.
Welcome back to the Get Geekish podcast. It has been quite some time. Yeah, we had things get in the way, life, jobs, things, kids. It all happens. But we want to get back on this old podcast bandwagon. We figured that it's almost spooky season again, so we're going to jump on the whole horror movie genre today to talk about horror movies.
What's funny is you have to really make sure you enunciate that, because if you're like my 4-year-old son and you walk around saying horror, but you're not enunciating, it's a whole different conversation.
I have to explain that to when you're older, young one. But it's interesting because this time of year, everybody always talks about horror movies. I know around here there was just a festival of horror a few weeks ago. There was Monster Day a few weeks back. And there's all kinds of talks about horror movies and what kind of horror movies are coming out, and everybody loves them. And I, for one, am generally not a huge horror movie fan.
Why is that?
Well, I grew up and I was always terrified of them. I was made fun of for them. I wasn't allowed to watch things until I was, when I was young. So my imagination got away with me. I was just not a huge fan of it. And to this day, now I'm going to proceed this. We're doing a podcast about horror movies, so there's plenty of them that I have found ways to love. But as a genre as a whole, I'm very seldom like, ooh, I should watch a horror movie.
What was your first introduction into horror? Like, do you remember the first horror movie you saw? And you were like, this isn't for me? Do you want like the Freudian
reason why I'm probably scared of horror movies?
Sure.
The first horror movie I remember, I had to be somewhere between 5 and 8 years old, and I remember walking out in the living room, and my dad was on the couch watching a movie on TV, and this was the mid-'80s, so it couldn't have been that bad. But all I remember was a black and white screen with like these conveyor belts, and people were strapped down on conveyor belts, and the conveyor belts would go under a little place that had a little rapier, and would stab him in the stomach 6 or 7 times, and then the next would go and then tear the next person. And that little 4-second snippet was my introduction to horror movies, and for decades I could think back to that scene, and if I saw it right now, it probably can't be horribly affected bad thing, but in 6-year-old Beano's brain, that was absolutely terrifying and disgusting.
That's funny. Yeah, so growing up, like, my grandmother, she loved X-Files, and the Twilight Zone and all that. So I remember, we'd be over at her house every once in a while, and they'd have that on. Tales from the Crypt also, they loved that show. But I think, I'm trying to think, because my timeline, when you get to a certain age, you think back, you're not sure which came first, but you remember they're all kind of along the same line. So, I guess this is a back in our day thing. We used to have a channel called UPN 20, and they would show 80s movies that had been edited for TV. Do you remember that?
Star Trek Voyager for 18 hours a day.
Yep. So I remember on there was Friday the 13th, or no, not Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. And I remember it was, on TV. And the only thing that I really remember from there is Johnny Depp laying on the bed and then the hand coming through and then just geyser of blood, right? And I was like, oh my God. But like you said, it was on TV, so how bad could it be? Mm-hmm. And then I remember being over at my cousin's house while they were having a yard sale, and we watched Day of the Triffids, the 50s or 60s black and white movie?
Mm-hmm.
And then Leprechaun, which, going back and watching Leprechaun now,
it's a joke.
It's so stupid. It is so stupid. But when you're, back, that movie came out in 92 or something like that. Back when I first watched that on VHS, in the very beginning, he's in like a little toy, it's a box, a wooden box, but I had a toy chest that looked exactly like that. So when I got home, that freaked me out. I was like,
here for your pot of gold, Derek.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny because I know you look back at it, you're like, that's dumb. But my parents weren't really into horror movies, so, we watched a couple of the Screams. I Know What You Did Last Summer. Final Destination, but those were really only the ones that we ever really watched. We didn't watch any of the slasher flicks like Halloween or Child's Play or anything like that. So I don't really have a dive into the 80s world of horror movies, except for recently I've started to try to watch some of them, and my God, they are campy. But
yeah, like I said, I was not a big fan. I watched some of them growing up, and I found a love for some because after you hit middle school, high school, I got made fun of enough that I had to make myself be okay with horror movies at least, and I found some ones that I like. Once I realized there could be fun in horror movies, like I found out that for me the distinction was I'm not a fan of gore horror movies.
Yeah,
there can be gore in it. That's okay with it. But when the focus is literally like, let's see how many intestines we can show spilling out of somebody's insides in 5 minutes, it just makes me kind of queasy. And I don't really want to watch the rest of the movie. But Final Destination, that came out when I was in high school. That was one of the first suspense horror movies that I walked out like, that was cool. That was really fun, because the whole movie you're just in suspense of what's going to happen and other things go out of the way. And then I started to find that love of, okay, so I'm down with suspense, just not so much the gore. And
to even this day, I still get paranoid driving by a log truck.
Yeah, everybody does. Because some of the ones, like, the first time somebody made me watch Army of Darkness, and that was what flipped the switch, and I realized Bruce Campbell was one of my heroes, and that horror could be funny. Even the first Saw movie, there was a few minutes of the first Saw movie that made me a little sick to my stomach, but overall, the idea of the movie and how it was like, okay, this is really fun and engaging, entertaining. I want to find out what happens, and I'm scared.
When I see that, I think that's what kind of comes down to is you look at it, and horror as itself, I mean, it's just like music. There is so many subgenres of horror that you can find something. Now, I'm more like, I don't mind the gore and everything like that, but it seems to me like a lot of, and I'll bring up the Terrifier series because the Terrifier is huge right now with Art the Clown. I don't usually get grossed out by horror or anything, gore or anything like that, but the first Terrifier, I watched it, and there's a scene in there that just made me like drop my jaw, and I was like, that is probably the most brutal and grotesque thing I've ever seen in a movie. And then Terrifier 2 was a little bit better because it actually had more of a plot. But you heard stories about people throwing up and leaving the theaters. And then, of course, Terrifier 3 is coming out next month. Those are fun. They're entertaining. But I'm more like you. I like the psychological aspect of it, the suspense where it's building up. And you leave the theater going, like the one I can think of that kind of did that to me when I was younger was White Noise. And it had something to do with the dead talking through the static of a TV, which obviously nowadays you don't get static in a TV. Mm-hmm. But I remember watching that and being like, well, that's kind of wild. And then, my girlfriend at the time, we were sitting there talking about the movie, and then like when it ends, it goes to static. And my TV went to static, and we just sat there and stared at it for like 5-10 minutes, like going, oh my God, did you hear that? It puts things in your mind. I mean, remember how when The Ring came out, that was a huge, huge thing. Yeah, I mean, trying to explain that to my daughter about that when The Ring came out, a lot of people still had VHS tapes. You could still go to Blockbuster and rent VHS tapes. So VHS tapes weren't some random weird thing in the past. That was there. You went to somebody's cabin. Yes, there was a VCR and some VHS tapes. That was super realistic. And every time I put one in and saw static, there was that little twinge at the back of your mind like, it's not real. It's not real. It's just a movie. It's just a movie. It's just a movie. For those younger listeners right now, if you happen to have millennial or Gen X parents and you come across a unmarked VHS, don't watch it. Who knows what it could be? Who knows? There's multiple reasons to follow that advice, but the horror movie is a good one to go with. But you mentioned how many genres of horror movies are, and it is pretty ridiculous. You go search horror movie genres, and it's like music. People have gotten to the point where they've made genres within genres of so specific movies. But there's actually a list of 10 horror genres that was put together by the Los Angeles Film School. They tried to categorize it all. So they had demonic horror films, paranormal horror films, monster horror films, slasher, zombie, gore, witchcraft, vampire, psychological, and comedic. Okay, so let's that just hurt my brain a little bit because a lot of those have crossovers, right? Yes. But you said, what was the not the you said demonic?
I feel
monster.
like demonic, paranormal, monster, zombie, witchcraft, and vampire can all kind of be lumped together. Like, really? They're all monster movies and made up,
just supernatural. Why don't they just call it supernatural? Not the TV show, but like it's a supernatural genre, right? Because those are all things that are mysterious.
Yeah. And
Though I will say, maybe zombies don't belong in that because most of the time the zombies are from a man-made virus. So I guess I could kind of see that one being not, but everything else seems kind of supernatural to me.
Yeah, I would agree that if I was doing this, I would take their list and lump that all into supernatural because it goes together. Because on top of having different ones, what about the movies when you have a vampire and a zombie in the same movie? I mean, come on now.
Or a vampire and a werewolf. Oh.
Yeah, what's the Adam Sandler cartoon? Where's the vampire?
Hotel Transylvania?
Yeah, Hotel Transylvania. What genre is that going to fall in the horror movie?
Animated. Well, see, and that's the thing is like I look at, you sent me this list beforehand and I was looking at this and I was like, I've seen a good chunk of these on there. But the thing is like, to me, horror movies are very, very predictable. I don't get scared by the jump scares. I like going to horror movies because I like laughing at other people secretly. So don't judge me on that one, but it's fun.
Secretly, you like laughing at other people.
Yeah. I don't laugh out loud in the theater, and I just like snicker to myself. But the thing is like I go to them because sometimes it's fine to shut off your brain. But the problem with most horror movies now is they try too hard to get the scare. They try too hard to do jump scare after jump scare after jump scare. Like The Conjuring, the first Conjuring was good. It did a few jump scares here and there. And then they kind of doubled down on it with the second one and the third one, and they have another one coming out. It's just...
I feel like The Quiet Place. The first Quiet Place came out, and there was so much suspense built up in that people were like going into cardiac arrest trying to watch that movie. The second one came around, right. It was more of the same, just more of it. And by the third one that came around, it was just, we just tried to force jump scares in, but there wasn't... It felt like there was not any of the suspense that was there in the original movie. It was like, oh yeah, we're going to have something jump out of it. Oh, something will jump out here. Something will jump out here.
I would say if you took the third one, Quiet Place Day One, because in my mind, it's a great for a sequel, but if you took out all the forced jump scares, it would be a much better movie. Mm-hmm. But that's why, like, I don't know. I think Stephen King said something about this in the 80s or 90s. I don't know. But for most horror movies, horror stories that you watch, sometimes it'll be a believable story or at least an entertaining one that'll kind of rope you in. But then the ending just leaves you Mm-hmm. And lately, because like this year I've been trying to see a movie a week. And there's been a lot of movies that just are horror movies that fall around the time that I can go. So I've seen them, and like, they have good concepts. Like Night Swim had a good concept, but there was like nothing like the movie. Don't waste your time on that movie. It's not good. But I look at these movies and I'm like, they try too hard. I think if you took a movie like The Conjuring or something along those lines where it actually kind of pulled you in a little bit, and this may be a controversial take, if you watch a horror movie and you take out the musical stings, I think that'd be much more impactful. Because
I get it. My daughter talks about that she is convinced she knows when something's going to be scary simply because of the music, because she's so in tuned that as soon as these types of music stings or this melancholy music or this thing that something's going to jump out, and she's convinced herself that she knows what's coming because of that. And with a lot of the modern movies, you can. As soon as you hear those notes, you're like, yep, here it comes.
Well, and that's the thing is I've seen a couple horror movies, and some of the classic ones did this best, where like they didn't have the stings, right? It kind of just let it build up on its own, because I think that's more dreadful is when you're hearing somebody breathing and it's just quiet. It's that eeriness where it's building up, and you're like, something's going to happen. Or the opposite, you have a movie that uses the stings in a creative way where it builds up tension, but nothing happens. So you're just like,
the Final Destination, where it does that, and then something completely different. Like the scene. We can give spoilers, right, for Final Destination. It came out 30 years ago.
There's gonna be spoilers in this.
That scene when he's in the bathroom clipping his nose hairs and you think he's gonna fall and hurt himself. Like that gave me the heebie-jeebies for like a month. the idea of doing that. But that whole scene, that was like 2 minutes of you just like, no, no. And then he steps back and falls and breaks his neck in the shower for it. Like, yeah, it was just enough to get super suspenseful. So then you get a feeling of relief, and then something else happens. Like, oh, wow, okay, wasn't ready for that.
Well, and it's funny too to see how some of the horror from our youth has evolved. Right, you have Scream, which is still a franchise and still going on. They have another movie coming out later on this year. They're bringing back I Know What You Did Last Summer. Chucky, for all things, became a TV show, which I think works great because that TV show is entertaining and they leaned into the dark humor of it, which if you watch Child's Play now, you're like, especially when we were kids, we're like, why were we ever scared of this doll? Mm. And right now my son's going through the same thing because Halloween's coming up, so they have Chucky dolls out and he's like, oh, Chucky, and he's scared of it. But I'm like, you just wait, dude. You're not going to be that scared.
Yeah. When we were kids, don't watch a movie, you'll get nightmares. Now we're like, hey, watch it. You'll be okay with it once you know what's going on. You break down genres, and I think the slasher genre and the gore genre are probably my least favorite of the horror movies. And I can appreciate parts of them. I know the references to them and all the pop culture, but even when it came out when I was younger, I was not big into Scream. I was not big into Jeepers Creepers. I was not big into I Know What You Did Last Summer. All those were just kind of like, meh, dumb teenagers getting murdered. Cool. Like,
well, that's the thing too. Is like when Scream came out, though, it kind of revamped the slasher genre, and it did it in a creative way where it kind of had that twist ending where, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, there's two killers, and it kind of like threw you for a loop, right?
And it didn't take itself too seriously. That was the part that I appreciated. Even if I didn't really like Scream, I appreciated that it made itself a slasher film, so it wasn't trying to be so serious about everything. It wasn't a CSI crime drama for 35 minutes, like.
And it wasn't too gory either. It kind of toed that line. And same with I Know What You Did Last Summer. Like, yeah, I mean, you look back and they're teen horror movies, right? But you look at a lot of the genres now, or the genres. You look at a lot of the horror movies now, and to me, they kind of fall flat. Like the one most recently that I would have to say that I rather enjoyed was Longlegs, and Nicolas Cage did a great thing, but it's also, I think, like you, I like more the psychological. And I mean, even if you look at the paranormal or supernatural aspect of it, there's a lot of great films that do a good job with that. But again, when it comes to the ending, you're like, they don't know what to do because people want happy endings. Horror movies kind of force those happy endings, and it kind of takes away when you're like, well, if this was real life, that wouldn't have happened. But yeah, we got a happy, feel-good ending. One of my favorite films, Sinister, is... Don't ever watch the sequel because it's not worth it. But the first one is great. Ethan Hawke, he's an author, moves into this murder house to get inspiration, and supernatural things start happening. And it actually ended pretty decently where you're like, okay, I'll go with that. And it did a good job by giving you the dread by not showing too much. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll argue that. I that's, I think, part of why I like supernatural horror movies. Horror movies, and comedic horror movies are probably my go-to genre for it.
Oh, Shaun of the Dead?
Oh, yeah.
All day, every day.
The whole series of the Cornetto trilogy, like, those are all amazing movies. And some of them are very gory. So, again, it's not that I'm against all gore. It's when it's done in the right place or something funny done with it. It's great. You said bad endings of some movies. A couple movies I actually like that have bad endings. 13 Ghosts with Matthew Broderick. Really enjoyed that movie for some reason. Saved the last 10, 15 minutes or so, and it just turned into a blood storm of, forget the script, let's just tear people apart.
Well, that's the thing, is like 13 Ghosts, Ghost Ship,
Cabin in the Woods did the same thing, too. Cabin in the Woods was kind of a fun, entertaining, like, oh, this is great, and then the ending happens, like, whoa, I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah, I like the aspect of Cabin in the Woods, and I'll still watch that movie, but yeah, it's when it turns into, oh, they need a sacrifice or else the world's going to end type of thing. I'm like, you guys don't know what to do with this ending, so you're just like,
What's the other supernatural that I liked out there? There was The Craft. I don't know if you can classify that as a horror movie. I saw it on some list, but I really enjoyed that movie.
That's more of a witchy bully movie. It's more about being bullies.
Yeah, it's Mean Girls with murder.
Yeah.
Sleepy Hollow, the Johnny Depp version, it's a pretty entertaining movie.
Again, I mean, there's some gore in it. Tim Burton, went off the rocker on that, but it was great. And then kind of along the same lines, what's the Demon Barber of
Sweeney Todd?
Fleets? Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's I don't know if you consider that horror, but it's kind of there.
Yeah, I also thoroughly enjoyed Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter and Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies.
As stupid as they were, yes.
Again, when you go and think this is not taking itself seriously, I don't have to take it serious either. It's going to be fun. And old 90s throwback was Seth Green and Idle Hands.
Oh my God, I love that movie so much.
And not just because that is Offspring in the soundtrack, right?
No. I mean, I think that is Devon Sawa's best movie. I mean, the thing about Devon Sawa is he's great, and he's kind of leaned into his campiness and everything because he's in the Chucky TV series, which is just great. Like, he's playing multiple roles. I'm all about it. But something about Idle Hands just, I don't know. It was fun.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that goes into, I'll go straight into some of the comedy movies because that's the one I have the most love for. We've already mentioned Army of Darkness.
Which is funny real quick because I remember when I was younger, when we were watching Leprechaun and Day of the Triffids, we saw that too. And to me, I was just intrigued by the cover of it because, it's that campy, like, hero
Bruce
cover.
Campbell
But
without a shirt on.
Yeah, I was like, but why? I don't want to watch this because it's a horror movie. I don't want to get scared. But then, when I got older and I watched Evil Dead, which tried to take itself seriously, and you're like just laughing through it. So then they redid Evil Dead and did Evil Dead 2, which they leaned into the campiness, and then went into Army of Darkness, and they just went, yeah, let's
just
have some fun.
So the other comedy ones, Zombieland and Zombieland Double Tap. I still think the first Zombieland is one of my favorite go-tos for a zombie movie. Like,
yep.
Lots of comedy, lots of gore, lots of dumb stuff. Tucker and Dale versus Evil. That is such an underrated movie. That needs to be higher up on people's lists of fun horror movies to watch.
I think anybody, even if you don't like horror movies, everybody should watch that movie. It is just so great. So great. Alan Tudyk is just awesome in it. And
yeah, and I think it's on Netflix too, right? So it's great. And another one that I feel like flies under the radar is Life After Beth.
That is a decent one.
It's got Aubrey Plaza in it and John C. Reilly, and zombie movie. Somebody comes back to life, tries to live again. It's a great little plot there.
Well, and recently too. I don't know if you saw Lisa Frankenstein.
I thought that was
fun.
Such a trash movie.
It was trash, but I don't know. Like, I enjoyed it. It was fun. But here's the thing: that's another thing where if you go in trying to overthink it, you're not going to enjoy it. That is a stupid movie with a bare minimum plot. Like, don't overthink it, and you'll have some fun with it.
Yeah, it was worth a watch. The previews made it look like it was something way different than it was. So we sat through it, and I'm pretty sure 40 minutes of my face just going, "What?" The Frighteners, Michael J. Fox. It's tough to go through a horror genre for that one because it was only PG or PG-13 and just about ghosts, but that was a fun movie.
No, I think it was R.
Yeah.
Because of the violence.
Violent Night was phenomenal.
Is that the David Harbaugh where he's Santa and it's basically Die Hard, but...
Yeah, it's probably more on par to an Army of Darkness style of how much blood and gore goes on with it, but it was dumb fun. And a lot of people throw in things like Ghostbusters and Beetlejuice and things like that, but it's really tough for me to call those horror movies. I mean, they're dealing with monsters in the underworld and things like that, but they're just straight up comedies to me.
But I mean, that brings up the discussion too, is like, just because something has a supernatural element to it, is it part of the horror movies? Because I mean, you look at Twilight, right? Vampires, werewolves.
That is true. Teen Wolf. Is that a horror movie? It's about a werewolf. And I have to give a nice mention to Troma Studios. They have tons and tons of horrible and horribly good horror movies. They used to be up all the time. Speaking of those, watching TV back in the UPN days, the USA Up All Night. You have either Rhonda Shear or Gilbert Gottfried introducing you to horrible B movies all night long. And I'm pretty sure I saw half of Troma's library on USA Up All Night. And man, some of them are so awful, but some of them are so good. Got the Toxic Avenger, Redneck Zombies, Romeo and Juliet, the Toxic Avenger. Yeah, it's good stuff.
I'll say Toxic Avenger was one of the ones that I grew up with. I loved it. Watched the cartoon. I'm excited if they ever release the movie that they redid with Peter Dinklage. I'm excited if because they filmed it, but something happened with the distribution rights or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I will not agree with you about Redneck Zombies. You made me watch that, and
it is horrible. It is the most horribly bad goods movie ever.
More than Meet the Feebles?
That's not a horror movie.
I know, but I'm just saying.
That's the bad pronunciation of it, horror movie.
Okay.
The ladies had a lot of campy ones out there, because you mentioned Leprechaun earlier, but you had things like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes and
Critters.
Gremlins. That was another of my things, because my mom took me to go see Gremlins when I was in like preschool or kindergarten, and she walked me out of the theater 10 minutes into it.
What?
Yeah. Because she was expecting a wholesome little movie about a fuzzy stuffed animal, and they started burning things down, and she marched me out of the theater. I was too young to remember, but I was told the story many, many times, and so I was assumed that Gremlins was a terrifying movie. And then I watched it, and I'm like, there's nothing scary about that movie at all. It's hilarious.
Well, what's funny too is you just brought up like Critters. Like, I remember seeing that movie and like how they go into the porch and everything, and we went to a family reunion where they had a house that looked like that, and I was like, oh my god, the Critters are here. But that was a fun one.
What are some of your favorite zombie movies? We've already talked about Zombieland, obviously, but what are some of the zombie movies you actually like?
Shaun of the Dead, 28 Days Later are pretty good. Would you consider I Am Legend? Is that a zombie movie, or
I saw put it in monster movies, but I call them zombies in I Am Legend. Especially if you get the but if you get the Blu-ray version that has the alternate ending, that ending's great.
Yep. Agreed. That ending. That's what I'm talking about. Is that ending? Yes, it was bleak, but it made sense for the story. The ending that they put in mass distributed was like
dumb.
What?
Yeah. Resident Evil movies, cheesy as all get out, but they're entertaining to watch at the very least now and again.
If they're on TV, I don't know if I'd actively seek it out.
It's fair enough. World War Z, that's one that I would watch, but I wouldn't seek it out. The book was a whole lot better. I wish they would have done a movie that incorporated more of the actual book, other than just one chapter of the book.
Brad Pitt. I mean, remember we saw that in the drive-in together. We went and remember it was followed by Man of Steel or something like that. And we watched it. We're like,
Yeah, I was like, okay, zombies, it's all right. And then there was also a big jump of the found footage movies. Blair Witch Project got big starting off of it. Cloverfield went down that kind of wrath a little bit. And what was the other one that was found footage?
I would say a good found footage that I've seen, besides, because the Paranormal Activity, right? They skyrocketed with the found footage. Like but there was one that came out along the same time, was called Quarantine, and it had the actress who plays Deb in Dexter in it, and that one was about like they're in an apartment complex that got locked down because of an outbreak, and I guess that's kind of a zombie movie, but I don't know. I would say Quarantine was, for found footage, is pretty decent.
Yeah.
But that's the thing too, is like we're talking about endings, is the first Paranormal Activity was pretty decent, right? It had some psychological stuff to it, and there wasn't any musical stings really to it, but then they kind of went, oh, well, we can expand upon this, and they did, 3 or 4 more after that one, and kind of did a weird side lore to it, and I'm like,
That is one thing that makes me kind of sad about horror movies too. It seems like that genre is very littered with the sequels upon sequels upon sequels. Like most of these horror franchises that are successful, it's not 1 or 2 or 3 movies, it's 5 or 6 or 7. Like, how many Friday the 13th? How many Halloweens? How many Aliens? How many Saws? They get one thing that works commercially, so they just redo it again and again and again and again and again.
And I would say that was probably be my most recent disappointment was I saw Talk to Me in the theater, and it's pretty decent for what it is, for, you know, a horror movie and everything like that. And it ended, I thought, pretty well, but, you know, because of the success of it, they're like, oh, we greenlit a sequel. I was like, why?
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't need a sequel. It's fine. Do standalone. It's fine. But
I was asking our listeners on I think Facebook about some of their favorite horror movies, and I found one I need to try though. That's called Cockneys versus Zombies.
what?
Just look that one up for the description, and it's going to be on my to-do list this week to find out what that movie's all about because it sounds hilarious. But it made me think of the musical horror movies that I think are amazing, including, we mentioned Sweeney Todd, Anna and the Apocalypse.
Love that movie. I did not know that was going to be a musical
No.
when I started that.
But that movie was absolute magic.
Yep.
Little Shop of Horrors. You call that a horror movie, technically. Cannibal the Musical. Horror and musicals can go together if done right. Let's build a snowman. Sorry.
Little Shop of Horrors was another one where they changed the ending to be less bleak.
Yeah.
And I guess it works, but I mean, I kind of like, if you ever have time to Google what the original ending was, I think that'd have been a lot better to see.
That's true. But
what about, real quick, what about Arachnophobia? How do you feel about that one?
Me and spider movies don't get along. Look. I don't care about clowns. I can watch a clown movie, no problem, but put spiders in it, I'm out. Can't do it. I know myself too well. Eight-legged freaks, arachnophobia, and I'll be in the other room, thanks. Make fun of me all you want.
So when it comes to like the more realistic side, how do you feel about that? Like, I mean, not even talking about like creature features, right? I'm surprised that's not a genre. Anyway, the more realistic where it, like you look at the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where it's like inspired by true events, or Psycho, or things like that. Like, I know some people are like, well, we shouldn't be paying homage to that, but at the same time, it's like,
if it's a good story, it's there. I mean, it can make for a good story. It's a lot of those I'm not inclined to go seek those stories out to enrich myself with. Like, if I want to see somebody kill each other, I want some made-up creatures to kill each other. I'm good with that. Don't need to imagine my neighbor coming to my house and skinning me alive. So hit up the comments down below. Let us know what kind of horror movies you think everybody else in the world needs to watch, because let's be honest, so there's some horror movies that are for everybody. There's some horror movies that are for very specific people. So if there's some gems out there that the rest of the world hasn't seen, let us know what they are, because I want to fill my horror to-do list for the season with things that are beyond Friday the 13th and Halloween and Alien.
That's the sorry, when you were talking about that, movie just popped in my head that I saw for the first time last year was Frankenhooker.
Frankenhooker? What theater were you at when you saw that?
No, it's like from the 80s or 90s, and what's funny is I watched that and then I went and saw Poor Things in the theater, which there's a lot of similarities between those two movies. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, it's tough scrolling through screens. Like, we'll do the one last flashback before we go. Working in video stores back in the day, early 90s, things like that. The horror section was 5 or 6 racks of movies, just the cover of every horror movie you could possibly imagine. And I miss those days, because you could look at a cover and be like, oh yeah, I'll try that. Oh, let's see what this is going on. And there was some good ones, there were some bad ones, but just being able to physically go and see all those different movies and make your choice, I miss those days.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's funny too is, back to everybody's, not everybody, but from Gen X, millennial, and then on, if you got to experience a movie store, you're going to have those memories, right? Of walking in and looking at a horror movie of, like, what was it, They Live or whatever, where it's like the skull coming out and you're like, oh, what is this? And like, just the covers would always intrigue you. And then at the same time, our generations are also going to have those memories of, I don't know about you, but like, I was at a sleepover one time for a kid's birthday party, and the parents went to sleep, and I think I've talked about this before, but he pulled out Dr. Giggles. He's like, let's watch this.
Oh, so we watched Dr. Giggles. Oh, God.
Yeah, we watched Dr. Giggles, and I was like, what is this movie? You always have these movies of like somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, or somebody whatever is like, oh, let's watch this, and then you're like, we should be watching this, and you watch it, and there's a scene from Dr. Giggles that is vividly burnt into my brain, and I'm never going to forget. because I was like 11 when I saw it, and I was like, what? And then, we watched Maverick with Mel Gibson afterwards because I was like, I need a palate cleanser.
Was the Dr. Giggles one where he put the drill in the mouth and like white foam would start shooting out of their mouth when he's drilling in their necks and things like that?
Maybe. I don't know.
Some dentist horror movie I remember seeing that I remember seeing. Just
Oh, that was, there was, like the demon dentist or something like that. Murder I don't know. I just saw a preview for that from the 90s or whatever. But yeah, Dr. Giggles has a scene in it that that's the only thing I remember from that movie is, yeah, I'm not going to get into it. Anyway.
So there you go. We've almost ended this like 4 times now, but there are some recommendations for horror movies you can watch from 2 guys that aren't all that into horror movies, but still found some great ones that are out there, Yep.
And if you have any good spider movies for Beano to watch.
No, I know no spider movies. No spider movies. All right, we'll talk at you next week.
This has been the Get Geekish podcast. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, share, and hit those notifications. We'll talk to you at the next episode. But until then, enjoy your passions. Go out and get geekish about something.